You ready?
Oh, yeah.
Let's fire it up.
This is the Hometown Holler. I'm Daniel Ayers.
And I'm Quinn Ray.
How's it going?
Hey, man. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you, and welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Hometown Holler. Today, we're going to take a field trip down to Raleigh, to the state capitol.
We get to sit beside each other on the
We
bus.
get to side each other,
Yes.
little love seat action over here. And we're here with former state representative Ricky Hurtado. I would call him a true Alamance County Hometown Hero. Definitely a friend of the Holler.
Yeah.
Would you say, Ricky, friend of the Holler?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Or you'll have to wait until the episode's over before you decide if you want to be a friend of the show. But during his term as the first Latino Democrat elected to the General Assembly, Ricky distinguished himself as a champion of public education, affordable health care access, and just good governance, honestly. But surprise, Ricky, you're not running for re-election. You're not running this year in 2024. So folks, stick around and find out why. We're going to press him on that. Hold your feet to the fire.
Why aren't you running, Ricky?
Right. Well, Ricky, thanks for coming on the Holler.
No, for sure. Thanks for having me. Before we get into it, I just want to say I love what y'all are doing here. And I've had so many conversations with folks all across Alamance County that really talk about the need for a real conversation about issues that really matter to the community here. And we're not getting that from local newspapers. We're not getting that from radio stations. We're not getting that from the typical conversation. Or when we do get it, it's very one-sided, right? And so just the fact that we're getting a different perspective of what's happening here in Alamance County is great.
Oh,
and
thanks,
so,
man.
yeah,
Yeah.
folks are really hyped about this.
Getting those kitchen table conversations actually around a kitchen table.
Yeah, exactly, right, exactly.
Well, thank you, Ricky. We really appreciate that. Quinn, do you want to throw the first question?
Well, before we even get into it, just a little bit more about Ricky, I think. So not only was he our former House representative, he also, I think, you were the founder of Latinx Ed. He was a
Moorhead Kane Scholar.
Moorhead,
UNC.
Got his master's from Princeton. And you were a product of North Carolina Public Schools, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Wow.
Wait, so public education works?
Surprisingly so, yeah.
Oh, maybe we should fund it.
That's outrageous.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you have quite a resume, and I think one question I have.
Okay,
if
go ahead.
I can
Yeah.
start. What does a state representative do? And I mean, I think I probably know most of it, but I've never done it.
Yeah.
So I mean, what do you do?
It's the $1 million question, right? I often say that it's the least understood position in our politics, but one of the most important, if not the most important.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because what happens at the state level impacts every single person in North Carolina every single day and has an outsized impact on issues that we actually really care about, right? Like public education is a great example. Y'all been talking
That's right.
about it a little bit in the podcast. We've certainly been talking about it in the community the last year, right? With Moldgate and the like. And folks don't always grasp that. Sure, there's a big role for the school board and the county commissioners to play, but the vast majority of the funding, as written in our state constitution, comes from the state level, right? And so when you think about the decisions we're making every day on how it's going to impact clean water and clean air, public education, housing, all of that stuff happens in Raleigh, in the state capital. And so it doesn't get the coverage it really should when we talk about issues, and much less so the day-to-day of what happens in Raleigh, right? Unless you're opening the News and Observer every day, you don't actually follow what legislators are doing on a day-to-day basis in the state capitol.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that I realized once I really started getting into politics. You know, as a young kid, I kind of was already in. My parents were into politics, but it was always that national politics. But it does matter who's our president and who our representatives are in Washington, but it really matters who's our representatives in the state. I mean, just look at this year, right? You know, women productive rights, the concealed carries, the education, housing, that's all here. And it took me, you know, meeting Ricky and kind of learning what it did to really understand that that's more important. Like for me, this election cycle, I'm more worried about who's my governor than who's going to be our president.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I grew up in 4-H, Alamance County 4-H, did a lot of stuff in Raleigh, the state capital. But even then, I didn't really have a firm grasp on what the General Assembly did.
Yeah.
And I met with Dan Engel was our representative at the time, and now he's on the school board. Shout out to Dan. He and I go way back. He actually, I give him crap for this because he, when I was like 14, he told me, he was like, this young man's going to end up in politics. So I guess Dan Engel's to blame for a lot. But I just thought you guys as state representatives, I thought it was a lot of just like showing up to ribbon cuttings and going to classrooms and answering questions about the Declaration of Independence from sixth graders, right? I mean, is that a lot? That seems like a lot of it.
I mean, that's some of what you do.
Outreach,
That's the part that folks see in
that's the part
your
that's
community,
visible,
right? Yeah.
Right.
You go to a school, you read a book, you engage with students, you go to ribbon cuttings, right? Support your local businesses.
But that's just the tip of the iceberg.
It's if that, right?
So what's the rest of the iceberg? Like, I guess maybe walk us through a day in Raleigh.
So the tough part about explaining what a legislator does, I get this question a lot. Well, like, what did you do when you were a legislator? Every day looks a little different, right? But if you were to try to describe your typical day, I would typically wake up, say, around 4 or 5 a.m. on a weekday morning. And the reason I would wake up that early is because if I had to be in Raleigh by 8 or 9 in the morning, I needed to get some work done for my full-time job. A lot of folks don't recognize that this is a part-time, what they call citizen legislator, right? And so you're doing this.
You pay what, like $13,000 or something?
A little more, $13,900.
Oh, okay.
That 900
Yeah.
matters.
Yeah.
So,
But you get that per diem.
Yeah, and you get that per diem, right? Which bumps it up if you're really busy up to like 25, 30K, right, a year. And so I would get some work done on my own time to make sure that I kept my full-time job and kept income coming into the house. That was the deal I had with my wife, right? Like you gotta keep making money if you're gonna do this politics thing. And so you get to Raleigh, and on any typical day you may have committee meetings where you're listening to bills that will then potentially get voted on the House floor. And Tuesday through Thursday, typically you would have votes on what was on the agenda that day, right? And so when it's really busy, you might be there till after dinner, but making decisions on, voting on different bills, sort of listening to amendments, going back to committee meetings to make sure that the bill's language is right, and then going back to voting on the House floor. And that's really sort of the pace of it, right? But there's also a lot of that's really the culmination of the whole process, right? Like, if y'all remember, the
I'm just a bill.
Exactly,
yeah, I was gonna
right?
Say,
It's
man,
not
Schoolhouse Rock, yeah.
Schoolhouse Rock. It's not that straightforward, right?
Right.
Because what they leave off is like all the side conversations in the hallway, talking to other legislators and lobbyists and other special interests on what exactly this bill needs to entail, right?
Well,
and
then in between, don't you have like constituent meetings? People coming to
course.
talk to you about different, water quality, school funding. Do we want this food line at this place as opposed to that place?
How often do you talk to the governor when you're there? Does the governor
good
come and
question.
talk to you?
The governor typically doesn't come to the state capitol. They were, I served in a time where the governor was of the same party as I was, right? And we were still in a position where we could hold his veto. So there was a lot to negotiate, right? Democrats and Republicans had to find some common ground if we wanted to make sure that the bill would pass and that Governor Cooper wouldn't veto it.
So even though you're a Democratic representative, right? But your party's in the minority. You still had some kind of leverage. You didn't just sit there and twiddle your thumbs and just say, well, whatever the majority party is going to do, they're going to do. So why am I here?
Yeah, exactly. And that is why this sort of super majority that keeps being referenced this year, as we talk about the legislature and what happened with Tricia Cotham, right? For political insiders and know how she flipped from being a Democrat to a Republican, like that vote actually really mattered.
Yeah.
It really mattered a lot because now the Republicans no longer have to negotiate with Democrats in the House or the Senate or the governor.
Well, I mean, look how many bills they passed as soon as she flipped, right? Like it was planned almost, right? She flipped.
Oh,
and
totally
boom, 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 boom,
planned.
boom.
Yeah.
They just, came after us, which I guess kind of leads us to the next question. So you were in the minority party. Now it's a super minority party. New maps came out. You unfortunately lost the race to Ross. And so everybody in Alamance, Ricky's our champion. We love us some Ricky. But you decided not to run. Can you kind of walk us through
Well, before we get to that, I do want to say for folks who might be new to Alamance County and folks who maybe missed the pageantry that was the 2022 election, like you didn't get reelected. It was very close. It was very close. And in the home stretch, this is how I feel about it. You were the victim of character assassination. Is how I would frame it. I don't know how you. I mean, that is just what I would.
He made the Daily Show.
I made the Daily Show. I mean, yeah. I mean, there was a picture of you performing community service, right? It was a garbage pickup, I believe, at the Hall River. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah, and I think you had just a Ricky Hurtado T-shirt on, just and your opponent, Slimy Steve Ross, doctored it and changed it to say defund the police, and just maligned you, and that and not only was that a factor, kind of the October surprise, your district was rewritten for 2022 to make it more difficult for you to win, right?
That's the second time, because they did it in 2020 and you had to move.
Right, they wrote you out of your district.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So you had to move in 2020 just to run. And then in 2022, they didn't write you out of your district, but they took away some of your precincts.
In 22, and then in 24, they cut you out of your district again.
So I'm starting to connect dots, and maybe I don't even need to ask you why you're not running. It seems almost like...
Well, for anyone listening, right, the fact that you had to go down that winding path to sort of talk about how the districts have changed every 2 years since, even before I was running, right? You can go back all the way to 2016, tells you all you need to know about one of the least known but most important things we do in politics, which is draw districts, right? And the point is to make it this confusing, right? The fact that we have to be talking about it, unpacking it, it confuses voters, it confuses your everyday citizen.
I mean, it confused us. Like last episode we were recording, and we were talking about District 63, 64, and I kept getting them. And it's not that I don't know which one's which; it's they keep switching them.
Well, and it's you said it's meant to confuse us. I mean, we're meant to redraw districts every 10 years to make sure the populace is even,
proportionate,
right? But whoever's in whatever party is in control does it to confuse the voter. We just know.
Confused or not confused, they do it to consolidate power, right? And to make sure they have the best chance to win those next elections coming up. And so yeah, what you all describing, right, we call gerrymandering. It is a big reason why I'm not running. And so Daniel, you pointed out very well sort of what happened in 2022, right? Even with all the money that was poured into the race, and even with many of these lies that were sort of, folks saw it on the air, on YouTube, etc., it was still a close race,
Super
right?
close.
And it's been close the last two cycles, right? And so even with all of the negative campaigning, right, going into 2024, I felt like, okay, at the end of the day, after two election cycles, what separated me and Steve has been like maybe 100 votes if you tally up everything.
Yeah. And to your credit, one thing I will say is the amount of money that Slimy Steve spent on that race, the just the pure filth of that campaign. I mean, and just the fact that it was also a midterm. We had the inflation thing, Biden's midterm. I would have been embarrassed to be Steve and win by that margin, given all the tailwinds he had pushing him forward. I mean, so the fact that he was barely able to eke it out, I think that's a great credit to you, and says a lot about Steve.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, so fast forward past that moment, right, and you sort of, even after that, right, I felt like, all right, it's clear that Alamance County is pretty split on who they feel like should be the representative, right? In any given year, given the dynamics, I won by a few hundred, he won by a few hundred. We should have a third round, right? Like if this was boxing, right?
I mean, if this is Rocky 3, right?
I mean, we got to do it, right? So I was up for the rematch. I was up to do this again, even if they were going to change the districts to make it more in his favor, right? Which is essentially what they end up doing, right? So you fast forward to October of last year of 23, where the Republicans get an opportunity to redraw the maps, which is a whole saga and an episode in and of itself on how they reached that conclusion to draw the maps. But the point is they did, right? And they end up not just drawing two districts in Alamance County that favor Republicans, the current incumbents, Steve Ross and Dennis Rydell. They also draw me out of the race, the district that I'd been running in since 2020, right? So the district looked pretty pretty similar, I should say, in 2022, 2020, 2018, and even 2016, where it includes some of Mebane, some of Graham, a lot of Burlington, right? It's sort of like the northeast corner of Alamance County, Pleasant Grove, Green Level. It's all that area. Well, in 24, in order for me to not be able to run against Steve and in a tight race, because we've been running close races for the last 4 years, they redraw the districts to sort of separate Burlington, Graham, and Mebane away. So they put me in a district that now includes most of southern Alamance and doesn't include any of the historical parts of 63, right? So
so you've been in 64 now.
I'm in 64 now, so I could, even if I wanted to run, I couldn't run in 63. And so taking myself out of the equation, what's upsetting to me is that, like, again, it's just like not fair to the folks of Alamance County, or really any county, right? This has happened all across North Carolina, not just Alamance County, but you're a perfect example, Quinn. You live in Elon, and you're going to be represented by somebody new for the first time,
right,
that hasn't been dealing with issues in Elon for the last 10 years, right? And, say what you want to say about the political process, right? I think the one thing that feels really unfair is that you get to continue changing the rules of the game every 2 years to your benefit. And that's exactly what's happened going into 2024.
No matter who's the party.
Exactly.
I'm against it. Like, that's just not my gig. I just don't want to see it. I mean, I'll just go ahead and say that's a real good thing to do for somebody who is super scared, right? If you're scared to go a round 3 in boxing, right, you just don't bring the opponent to the table.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You just, I guess, change the weight class, and now they're featherweight and you're heavyweight, right?
Just like that.
It's so disheartening. And I guess one question I have for you, and I mean, maybe I kind of know the answer, but what would entice you to get back in the game? Yeah. Is that something you think about? I mean, is it just like you're just waiting for the maps to get redrawn a 90th time, and fingers crossed it looks a little bit more favorable?
Yeah, unfortunately, as much as the maps have been drawn and redrawn over the last 10 years, I don't anticipate the maps being drawn again until 2030. So I think we're actually this is it, just because the current Republican Party has control of the Supreme Court, which is sort of the referee in this match, right? And then they're one that sided with the Republicans. But there's not much that it's not about enticing me, right? I ran because of issues that are impacting Alamance County in North Carolina, and those issues unfortunately aren't going away anytime soon, right? When we talk about fully funding our public schools, I'm a former educator, product of public schools. That's what really got me into this. A bit naively, right? But I wanted to do right by our schools and realize how big of an uphill climb that is. So that was a big part of why I jumped into this race. Housing, for example, and economic sort of inclusion and growth in Alamance County. These next 10 to 20 years in Alamance are huge for the future of this region. And I just feel like our current elected officials often plan in a very short-sighted way, right? When you think about the impact of industry, you talk about out west with what's happening with like Boom Supersonic and all the sort of industry that's coming in out west, south with like Toyota. That is a huge plant that's going to transform that region. And
we're
just
getting
like
Buc-ee's.
And Buc-ee's, right? Yeah, of course, right? Yeah, I'm scared to say Buc-ee's. I have no opinion, y'all.
What's your stance on Buc-ee's, Ricky? That's what we really want to know.
But when you think about it's great that we're having that sort of economic development, but that also means we need better infrastructure, right?
Absolutely.
We need to make sure we have clean water. Where are these kids going to go to school, right?
That's it.
Folks in our local businesses, I've talked to folks that work with and alongside the chamber too. More often than not, when people are coming to sort of relocate or open a business here in the community, they're not just asking about tax incentives and things like that. They're also talking, well, how good are our local schools?
Right.
Because the folks, the CEO of that company, the president of that small business, whatever it is, they probably also have kids or family that are going to have to go somewhere, right? And at some point, you're not going to be able to just lean on charters or privates to sort of like fill that gap. You're going to need to make sure that we have
at some point
good schools.
Tax breaks aren't going to be what draws people here. It's going to be the quality of life and the quality of the community that we invest in.
And we're at that tipping point where is going to be a major factor for how we grow here. So all that's a long-winded way of saying like these issues aren't going away anytime soon. I'm going to continue to stay plugged in, and when the timing's right, the timing's right. I think that for me has been the biggest thing. I didn't care as much about the title. I just wanted to make sure that, there's a role for me to play in making sure that we push our community in the right direction. So.
Right. There's definitely a role. So I kind of talked about it on one of our other episodes, but I assume you feel the same way, after being a representative. But you've also learned that there are other ways to impact your community. So you're still staying plugged in. I mean, you're here at the Holler. Hopefully this is going to help people. But, hopefully this encourages people to work on somebody's campaign, help fundraise for somebody. I'm sure you're going to vote. And I think 24, if North Carolina is going to flip, it's got to come through Alamance. Mm-hmm. And so what can we do? What can people
I would just even go further into counties like Alamance, Cabarrus, New Hanover.
Johnson,
right, exactly, yeah. But you're right. The road, there are a few counties that are going to make all the difference.
Oh,
and Alamance
absolutely.
is one of them, absolutely.
I mean, just even, when Ricky was a representative, that House District 63, that one seat prevented having a super minority. So, but what can people of Alamance County do this coming up cycle to help move us forward?
Yeah, there's so many, right? There's so many things you can do right now. Yeah. I think the first thing you can do is make sure that you and your friends are registered to vote at the right location, right? You may have voted in the past. We have a lot of new residents in Alamance County who may have been registered to vote in Orange County or Durham County or out of state. Make sure you're registered to vote here. But more than anything, right, I think for anyone that is actually interested in civic engagement in Alamance County, that is the biggest sort of area of opportunity, is making sure that all of the new residents that are coming here are actually registered to vote. And so I was talking to a nonpartisan organization last week as part of this leadership development program that's statewide called the North Carolina Leadership Forum. And she leads this nonpartisan voter registration organization, and just how important it is to sort of think about what your plan is as a community on getting more folks registered to vote. And so I think that a lot of folks who used to work on my campaign, for example, are now sort of texting and calling and saying, like, what are other ways to plug in this year, right, now that you're not running? And so, like, that's, a great way. Like, think about what are those organizations, right? NAACP, You Can Vote, other organizations that are registering people to vote and make sure that they're engaged for 2024. I think the other way, right, is sort of thinking about what are those issues that matter to your community, right? Like, and how do we lift them up to, like, the hometown hollers of the world, right? But like the more folks that attend their city council meetings, their school board races, and know like who's running and like what are the issues.
And you don't even have to attend in person. You can stream this stuff.
That's the beauty of it, right?
Get you some popcorn and a 12-pack or something. You can stay home.
There's a Republican candidate that's running for office this year that saw me at one of the last school board meetings and said, "Where have you been?" Right? I was like, "I can watch this from home. You know that, right?" Like, and I'm not trying to make a point and grandstand by making a public comment. No. So let me just watch it from home and get my news, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, we're coming up on time. Ricky, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the Holler. Where can folks find you on social media?
Yeah, so I'm still relatively active on social media. You can follow me at Ricky Hurtado NC on Insta, on Facebook, wherever. Share y'all stuff regularly, right? And I'm sure we'll continue having this conversation and thinking about how do we make Alamance County, North Carolina, a better place to live for everyone.
Yeah, and I hope at some point throughout the year we can have you back on to give us your hot takes, or if you don't have any hot take, just some lukewarm takes.
Some lukewarm takes.
I'm sure there'll be plenty of hot takes this year.
Well, before we leave, is there anything else you want to tell listeners about what's happening in Ricky's life? What's the next steps? What are you doing once you leave here?
Yeah, I mean, I've been actually pretty active in 23. Sort of, I made a conscious decision not to be maybe as active online, but still very active.
Social media detox.
Yeah, right. It was a bit of a social media detox. So I still, I'm a part of the governor's task force on racial equity and criminal justice, and that's been a big big thing that I've done in the last year, and thinking about how to make our communities safer for everyone.
Wow.
And having real conversations, right? Yeah. And kudos to Governor Cooper, right? Because after I lost my reelection, they wanted to make sure that even not just me, but folks that maybe lost tough races or just folks that weren't going to be in office, like how do you continue serving the public, right? And so they thought that would be a great place for me to continue my service. ironically too, because so much of my campaign last year was around like community safety, and you know, it was a very black and white conversation when like there's actually people in North Carolina that are trying to have a real conversation.
Community safety, and he wanted to defund the police. I mean, what?
Shocking, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, but I mean, I think this year's continuing that work. I chair another advisory committee for the governor around Hispanic and Latino affairs to make sure we're integrating a new generation of new Americans into North Carolina.
That's fantastic.
And yeah, I think locally, right, it's just making sure that we're staying plugged in with not just politically, right, but civically, serving on nonprofit boards, and you know, we'll see what else comes our way. I'm sure there won't be a shortage of work with a presidential and governor's race.
That's right. That's right.
No doubt. Well, speaking of races, I want to announce to the audience, February 9th is the deadline to register to vote in the North Carolina primary. So if you're not registered and maybe you've registered in North Carolina, but if you moved, you got to register at your address where you're at now. So February 9th is the deadline. Early voting for the primary begins February 15th. So if you haven't made a plan to vote, don't wait. Rookie will find you. He will. It's like Santa. Like, you'll leave them coal. Or maybe you'll just steal things, take their microwave, their fridge, disconnect their power. So make a plan to vote. Do it right now. Bring a friend. All that.
Follow us on the socials. We'll have
and
some
follow
links
the
to
Hometown
it.
Holler. Yeah. And share our stuff. Help us, as I say, hype the Holler. Boost our content on social media. So we are on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. And TikTok. We are on TikTok now. We do have a TikTok. So things are. And the big news is we were initially just on Spotify.
Yeah.
But we're also on Apple Music.
That's right.
So for folks who are in the Apple ecosystem, we're here for you. And I think that's it for this episode.
Awesome. Pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good.
Pretty good. You feel good?
Would you come back, Ricky?
I might. You know.
Okay, cool. Next time we'll have candy.
That was great.
That's right.
Appreciate y'all having me.
Yeah. Good to see everybody.